Hello and welcome back to the Skylark song. Today is chapter 19. Robin brushed her shoulder with crossed fingers. Why would the coyote give her this now? Surely he must know what she'd use it for. Surely he hadn't been so blinded by his desire as to be lulled this far into complacency. Surely it wasn't a mistake. All that claptrap about his mother, what did it mean? Stop it. Don't overthink, she scolded herself. This is your chance. Take it. Worry about the rest later. She shoved the hairpin into her bodice, hiding it amid the layers of lace and silk. Then she turned the mirror around and scanned the red words written on the back, muttering to herself as she tried to build connections between the clues and what little she knew of the building she was in. She committed them all to memory and then smudged the lip paint into illegibility in case anyone tried to use it to follow her. A glance at the window confirmed that her room was on the western side, the sun setting across the wide grass lawn behind the border of the forest. Okay, so south, 3, bird, league. Every stupid word is about shapes and distances. Not helpful if I have no reference. How far is a league compared to a Saskwyan kilometer? We're south of Pyrea, definitely, but where is Lylon in relation to... She thought of the map she'd seen the day she'd first had to fly on her own. The forests of Klonn were densest north of the city, so that meant Lylon was south of here, she thought. It has to be south, bird, 3... We're 3 days walk from the city. 3 something as the bird flies. That puts the force between Lylon and the southern ports, doesn't it? God damn it, I wish I had a map. She closed her eyes, tried to visualize where their location might be based on past sojourns over this part of the forest. There was a low hill to the east, and Lylon below that, and... Running hells, Robin muttered, both amazed and appalled at her own thick-headedness. An estate in the woods, a private airstrip, a target drawn in red concentric circles on a topographic map pinned to the floor between her feet. The bloody fingerprint. Idiot! Now, she thought. That was the sign you were waiting for. It's time. Now. She made sure her hair was secure. Her boots were laced tight, that Al's goggles were around her neck, and that she was wearing as much of the disgustingly ornate jewelry as she could manage. If she was getting out of there, she was taking as much of the coyote's wealth with her as possible. There was no telling how much she might need to pay to keep people quiet or to garner enough supplies to make it home. She only wished she had a pair of trousers. She didn't relish the thought of traipsing through the forest in skirts, and a bit more time to change. As it was, she was stuck in the sapphire blue brocade gown that she'd worn to dinner. Even her usual servant's dress would have been a better choice, but she'd ruined her last one, and the replacement hadn't arrived yet. Stuck with the cumbersome pile of silk and lace, she rolled up her sleeves and removed most of the petticoats to free up her feet. She kept the bottommost layer to protect her bare knees from the stiff, scratchy underside of the silk. Wings wasn't ready yet, but she couldn't dawdle now. There was no telling when the coyote would take the hairpin back. Maybe this was a test, a ploy. Maybe she was about to walk right into a trap. Maybe... No. Stop, Robin told herself sharply, and shoved worry aside. Just like in a glider, she had to shut out all other concerns and focus. Beaks to the sky, Skylark. Time we bloody well got the hells out of here. Trust me, her memory whispered at her. I will win us our freedom. But she couldn't bring herself to picture the face that went with that echoed voice, did not allow herself to think of what that face might look like when the coyote found her gone, how betrayed he might feel, and what they might do to him because of it. She couldn't afford to think like that. If she did, if she thought about him and what he was starting to mean to her, she would stay. And that would be that. She would have committed herself to the Klonn cause, to never returning to Pyrea, to never seeing her parents again, to being a Klonn nobleman's lover until she died of confinement, used, tamed. And Seelies were never meant to be caged. Screwing up her courage, Robin pulled the hairpin from her bodice, crossed the door, and picked the lock. The ivory stick was not as agile as she preferred, but with the help of the straightened back of one of the dozens of pairs of earrings Robin had refused to wear, she managed to jimmy it open. Her breath caught in her throat. as the internal mechanism clicked. She waited for the sound of boots, for the Coyote or the Seneschal or one of their hosts to come around a corner, but none came. What about him? Her heart said, her mind circling back and back to the thought of him, to the memory of the mark on his face that first night. Something in her chest twisted, and she stamped it down hard. No, there's no time to convince him to come with me. I am a soldier of Saskwya, and I have a duty. I am not some husband-hunting, wealth-poaching flirt. Robin firmed her resolve. She clutched the hairpin in her hand, ready to wield it as a weapon, if need be. It would be inelegant, and it would force her to get much closer than she'd prefer, but on the other hand, the possibility of stabbing out one of the Seneschal's eyes loomed large. She would be doing the Coyote a favor, too, if she did manage to blind the bastard. Folding the pin into her voluminous skirts, she crouched further and listened at the keyhole. The hallway always seemed genuinely empty, but Robin's heart still thumped hard in the base of her throat because she knew she couldn't always hear them approaching over the carpet. She took a steadying breath and, pushing down to keep the hinges of the door from creaking, just as she did at her parents' house, she slowly turned the knob. It gave all the way, and the door barely whispered as she pulled it inward. Pin brandished once more, she stepped around the doorframe, flattened herself against the wall on the opposite side, and peered out. Her caution, it seemed, was unnecessary. No one waited for her in the hallway, weapons drawn and ambush ready. This might actually be too good to be true, she thought. But it was too late to turn back now. She was already out of her room. The lock was already broken. If she went back in, the Seneschal would know that she had tried to escape the minute he put his key to the door the next morning. Robin swore and picked up her skirts. She slinked down the hall towards the first turn as quickly as she dared, thankful for all the practice she'd had thieving from the factory fields. She turned left at the hallway that branched off behind the little taxidermied dog. Heading for what she hoped was south, she tried to keep her sense of direction straight amid all the twists and turns of the corridors. Objects dart acted as her path markers, and she prayed that she remembered the way to the study. She'd rarely been taken the same way twice. It would be embarrassing indeed to pick the lock to the study workshop only to find herself somewhere else entirely, like the Coyote's personal bedchambers. A sudden and ridiculous image of the Coyote waiting at her final destination, grinning at her from the middle of a large wedding bower, made her pause. She took several deep breaths to stave off the panic and readjusted her grip on the pin, reassured and ready. "Stop it," she told herself. "You know that's not who he is." But the image did give her an idea. Surely they hadn't put bars on every window, had they? What if there were others, rooms with windows that were clear, windows she could slip out of silently? She tested all the doors on the way to the study. Some were locked. Some opened, but led only to empty rooms with no windows at all. Each time she opened one, she feared she'd see the Coyote smirking at her from the other side. She never did, but that just served to increase her anxiety. Her back teeth ached from pressing them together so tightly. The study, when she got to it, was exactly as she'd left it that morning. Wings was safely tucked away in her burlap sack, the tool wallet conveniently tidied up and closed beside it. Robin glanced around, making sure there was no one hiding in the shadows, and then closed the door behind her. She crossed the room quickly, stuffing the hairpin into her hair for safekeeping and easy access, and freed Wings from the burlap. Crouching low over the rocket pack so she could see more clearly in the gathering darkness, she didn't dare turn up a lamp. Robin was grateful that the last few weeks had afforded her more than enough time to become familiar with its inner workings. Swiftly, she painstakingly undid every clever mistake she had rigged into its guts. The biggest problem was the primary fuel feed line. In an utter stroke of genius, some mid-flight before her had redirected its flow, cycling it into the air mixture valve, ensuring that no matter what else was done to repair it, the pack would literally drown itself if it was ever turned on. She had figured out this fix a while back, but had left it intentionally for last. It should have been simple enough to unscrew the cap, switch the feed line over one port, and screw it back into place. But her fingers kept slipping, her hands shaking from the excess of adrenaline. Stop it, she scolded herself. Focus, don't screw this up. Her heart was pounding so loudly all she could hear was the ragged whoosh thump of her own breaths and pulse jamming her ears. Calm down, Captain, or you'll never hear anyone coming. With a quick, wrenching twist, the fuel line was put back in its proper port. Robin lowered the access hatch, latched it, and then slipped wings back into the burlap bag. She rolled up the tool wallet and shoved it into her bodice, then grabbed another flat screwdriver off the desk and slipped it into the knife holster in her boot. Tugging the drawstrings of the burlap bag tight, she looped them over her head and around one arm. She'd much rather have just put the pack on, but the metal might cast reflections, and she couldn't take the chance that a glint at the wrong time might give her away. I've done it, Al, she thought, and the relief that flooded through her made her pause, scrubbing at her eyes. She refused to let herself cry, though, because if she let even one tear fall, she knew she'd never be able to stop. The Coyote would find her in there, a sobbing, sopping heap, and he would finally be able to keep her because she wouldn't be strong enough to resist anymore. She had fought so hard. She had played the game for so long. She was tired. She was angry, and she was tired. Rage, Robin said to herself. Focus on the rage. Use it. Get out of here and get your revenge for Al, for Wade, for all of them. As she turned to go, planning to find a room where the windows weren't barred, the blueprints heaped up on the desk caught her eye. She didn't dare leave them behind, not when there was a chance that the Coyote could use them to force another mid-flight to try and build a replica of the pack. She couldn't take them with her either, though. The untimely rustle of paper might be the undoing of this endeavor just as surely as a glint of moonlight on metal might. Plan of action decided, she picked up the blueprints and, quiet as possible, laid them in the cold grate of the fireplace. Tinder was already stacked and ready for tomorrow, so it was simple to take a match from the box on the mantel and light the corner of the paper. Robin waited and watched until all the pages were curled and burned beyond saving, and then snuck back out into the hall, ears open. She held her breath. Nothing. Pressing herself flat against the wall, she moved as silently as she could over the carpet, wincing at every squishing footfall. Cold, calm, collected, she told herself, breathing steadily and trying to focus on getting out, getting away, getting free. Not wanting to waste time searching for windows on an upper story that would make her have to jump down, she decided to try the rooms on the way to the kitchen. It was riskier. If there wasn't an escape before that room with the nightmarish pantry, then there was no guarantee that the kitchen itself had a delivery door, or that it would be empty of anyone doing dishes or preparing bread for the next day. But it was the only other access point she could guess may be there in this otherwise labyrinthian house. Back on the ground floor, she sent a quick prayer up to the gods of luck, brushed her shoulder with crossed fingers to guard against ill omens, and picked the lock of the first unfamiliar door she found. When she slipped inside, closing the door silently behind her, and crossed to the window, she found it miraculously unbarred, although it was mullioned into little rigid squares. She studied the window and angled her head against the glass so she could peer at the latch outside that would release the casement and allow her to remove the pane of glass and slip out. The matching latch on the inside was gone, so no one could open it from here. Casting around the room, she realized this one was a proper library. The shelves were littered with curios, and among the detritus she found a paperweight large enough to serve her purpose. Carefully, she tore a strip from the bottom hem of her gown and wrapped her hand. Then she picked up the paperweight and slammed it against the bottommost pane of glass. One of the squares shattered on the fourth try, and Robin stilled, holding her breath. No sounds beyond her own harsh breathing broke the silence of the night. She knocked the broken glass away with care, then squeezed her arm through to the pulley on the outside. Her hand met only air. "Omens," she hissed, "not running close enough." She shoved hard against the mullion with her shoulder, wincing at the bruise it would cause, at the way the few remaining fragments of glass snagged on her sleeve. She took a deep breath, trying to force her thudding heart back into a rhythm that reminded her a little less of a terrified jackrabbit. The adrenaline floating through her blood made her shaky and impatient. She forced herself to take a deep breath and go still. She had to stay calm, or she would make some sort of horrible mistake, and that would put an end to this little adventure faster than a stray dog falling on a scrap of abandoned bone. Patient, Slow. Calm, she reminded herself, while the rest of her screamed, "Let's go! Let's go! Let's go!" All up her arm, her skin tightened into prickling goose pimples, sweat drying rapidly in the chill evening air. She stretched her hand out again, imagining for a brief second that somehow the air could get between her joints, as if that could make her fingers go just that little bit further. Dust and paint flakes pressed against the cheeks she had smooshed against the wall. They stuck to the sweat there, giving her a smattering of what was sure to be strangely shaded new freckles. She was so close! Her fingers slipped over the roughened handle of the window's outer latch, the pockmarked surface scraping teasingly at the tips of her nails. Another hard shove against the mullion, and she managed to close her hand around the whole thing. Taking a deep breath, she pulled. She forced herself to go still again, and then took another deep breath to forestall the urge to just yank at the pulley. Impatience and recklessness was what brought down gliders. It could bring down this venture just as easily. Finally, she pushed it upwards, and it clicked. She eased her arms soundlessly back through the glass, and then, delicately, pulled the whole frame from the window. It came away easily in one piece, and she set it aside to lean against the wall. The only sound that split the still night air was her soft hiss. She stepped back and eased the pressure off her burning shoulder muscles. When she peered out the window, she realized it was still several feet up off the ground, but absolutely climbable. There was even some of that convenient wall-covering vegetation, the thick and twisting ivy she had taken note of before. Once the ache in her shoulder had eased, she managed to wriggle out head first, then swung her legs around so she was pointed the right way round. Carefully avoiding any other windows, she began her downward descent. The ivy creaked ominously in the cool air, but Robin made it to the ground in one piece, her feet crunching on the frost-rimed grass. Her fingers were already growing red and numb in the chill, and she wound them into her skirts for protection. Skimming along the wall, staying low, she paused in the deep shadow of a corner where a wing met the main building. She looked up and gasped. The Coyote hadn't exactly been honest with her. It wasn't just a country manor or a forest estate. The place was a goddamn palace. The scope of the grounds was large enough that the garden wall was a vague white line in the distance, broken up with a highly sculpted view of groomed hedges and roses strangling rigid trellises. Beyond that, the untempered wilds of the forest were held at bay by the landscaping. Behind her, the wall was cold white marble shot through with veins of silver and shadings of pale bluish gray. Robin resented the further proof that the seneschal seemed to be dressing her as a matched accessory to the Coyote's household, and pushed away from the wall to make a break for the hedge. A sharp tug on the hem of her dress brought an aborted scream to her throat, fear surging upwards to suffocate her larynx. No, I won't go back, she thought as she yanked the hairpin out of her hair and whirled around to stab at whatever hand clung to her. The pin met not flesh, but the hard surface of the wall, and was turned aside easily. It skittered out of her hand, spinning into the gravel with a clatter that sounded overly loud to her strained ears. Her gown was snagged on a broken ivy branch. Robin bit down hard on her cheeks to keep from screaming in frustration. Being on edge for so long was starting to make her imagination run wild. She tugged on the gown and didn't suppress the gleeful smile that spread across her face from the sound of the fabric ripping free. The pin, she gave up for lost. It had skittered into the shadow, and Robin didn't have time to crawl around searching for it. Taking a deep breath, she craned her head back and stared up into the night to check for any airships that might spot her escape across the lawn. Stars winked welcomingly in the open sky above the house. How Robin had missed the clean, free air of the sky. The fresh air sang in her lungs like the siren's call of a god of fortune. Soon, she promised herself. Satisfied that she wouldn't be spotted from the air, she bent and crept across the lawn towards the nearest pool of shadow. By the time she was at the edge of the garden, her arms throbbed from holding the burlap bag away from her side to keep it from clanking, and her shoulder burned where the rope of the drawstring dug in. Panting, Robin stopped only when she was fully concealed by the shadow of the ornamental garden wall. She squatted and rested against the white marble, measuring the distance she would have to climb, finding the holes in the gullies between the great slabs with her eyes before she would have to test them with her fingernails and boots. Robin craned her neck, rolled her shoulders, flexed feeling back into her frigid fingers, counted backwards from 100 in order to calm her breathing, and then pushed away. She didn't dare to stop for long. Her absence would be discovered, that was certain. The question was whether it would be in the morning when the seneschal brought her breakfast and found her room empty, or whether it would be sooner if there was a patrol who inspected the windows for... Shouts in Clonnish. A siren wailed. Robin swore and brushed her shoulder with fingers crossed. Behind her, the windows of the huge building blazed to life, and the sharp retort of dogs barking played across the wind. There was no time to find a stealthier exit, so she brushed the bad luck off her shoulder a second time and scrambled up to the low ledge. The trip over the wall was brief, but Robin's arms complained bitterly by prickling the tips of her fingers with pins and needles. When she was finally perched at the top, she hauled the bag up to her level. "Day!" someone in the distance shouted, and immediately a circle of light swept across Robin's body. It was too low to cast illumination on her face, so she ducked her chin down, hoping her brown skin would at least keep her face from reflecting back. But no, her hair! Oh, she wished her strange new hair was easy to cover. She should have stolen some sort of cap. She scrambled around and swung her legs over the other side of the wall, peering into the thick shadows to find a safe place to land. "Turds," she snarled into the night. "Goddamn ill-omened, stinking, frozen bags of turds!" The vicious barking was getting closer. A wrenching heave and a thundering boom filled Robin's ears as the piece of the wall she was clinging to shuddered violently, gravity yanking at her and the most of the wall around her down into the bracken. A small scream escaped her throat before she could rein it in. "They shot at me," she thought. "They actually shot at me."
Give up when you're down.